Hello and welcome everyone to our 20th podcast. I'm Linda and here is Mike.
Hi, Linda. Welcome, everyone. In this podcast series, we are exploring social threefolding by reading and discussing the original 1919 basic book by Rudolf Steiner, The Core Points of the Social Question. We are currently moving through Chapter 2 about the principles and theory of social threefolding. This chapter is titled Realistic Attempts at Solutions. Our recent focus has been on the high priority need to separate state and economy. Today, these two are essentially fused within our modern unitary society, and this fusion leads to a fundamental incompatibility of principles that drives corruption, unfairness, and economic inefficiency. So we must take a bit of time to completely rethink our current ideas and assumptions about the economy and about government. The system we have today has not always been like this, and in the future, it will likely change again. In a future threefold society, the economy, in addition to managing the production and distribution of goods, would also administer money, banking, and finance independently of the government, while the government would be small but powerful, driven entirely by the democratic equality of citizens that would deal only with fair laws and nothing else. The economy would not have unlimited power. Instead, it would be penned in from two sides, from the natural foundations on the one side and the rights that come from the democratic rights state on the other. Labor relations, ownership relations, and capital formation would be handled differently, not in a socialist way, nor in a purely capitalist way either, but in a completely different, threefold way, which we will discuss in more depth in the next chapter. So, to imagine these completely different institutions in a threefold society, we must think entirely new thoughts and not just rely on what we already know and experience today. Politicians and others involved within the rights life of a threefold society would have nothing to do with industries, employment, banking, and so on. People involved in lawmaking and law enforcement would only concern themselves with principles of fairness, while economic associations, a completely new non-political institution, would take on the responsibility for all these functions related to the economy. The two pillars of a threefold society are a new labor framework and a new ownership framework. The new labor framework depends on a strict separation between labor, which belongs to the rights and cultural areas, and the products of labor, which belong to the economic life. Labor would be regulated according to entitlements and obligations set out by the democratic rights life, that is, by the workers themselves. And so the rights life would decide about the balance between work and leisure that the economic life would then have strictly to conform to. And so, if a particular society decides that workers should have longer vacations and fewer working hours, then that same society must accept that there will be fewer economic goods produced to meet human needs. Or, as we discussed last time, if a society decides to replace labor with robots and other labor-saving capital, then there must be a way to channel the wealth that is generated as a result, such that not all of it goes to private individuals, so that enough wealth is reallocated to all people who have a legal right to a fair standard of living. And this is precisely where the new ownership framework comes in as a second pillar of social threefolding. Instead of our current system of private ownership, where surpluses flow to those who already have the wealth to afford to own capital, now in a threefold society, money is issued and administered independently by the economic life, who makes capital available inexpensively to those who have the competence to manage this capital for the benefit of all. In this way, the private manager of socially owned capital can remain a free entrepreneur with an entitlement to wealth that arises from innovation and risk-taking, while private shares transform into social shares, allowing wealth to stream to where society needs it most, and not merely remain congested in private hands, which is a situation that greatly contributes to a harmful gap between rich and poor in our times. So again, this is not socialism, because the social group has no say over the management of capital and means of production. Social threefolding strongly advocates for capital formation and wealth accumulation, which are essential for voluntary private lending and gifting. But it also differs from capitalism because the new financial system, the new credit system, relies neither on government fiat currency nor on private wealth and the power of the rich to take advantage of the poor. So the new ownership framework, which depends on a new credit and money system, forms the second pillar of social threefolding. And once again, this will be the main topic of the next chapter, where we will dive into all this more carefully. But with these two pillars in place, the old antagonisms between left and right, between worker and capitalist, can simply fall away. In the workplace, workers, managers, and owners will align around a common goal: efficient production directed at meeting human needs. And everyone will receive a fair share of what is collectively produced through a counter-value sharing system called a distribution contract. Meanwhile, entrepreneurs will no longer have to seek out the shark-like investors who hold all the power of money to make anything go forward. Instead, a new money and financial system will ensure that competent people will be managing businesses productively in a way that does not cause social harm, yet also in a way that does not lead to any of the downsides of socialism. So it is crucial to think new thoughts. We are not discussing a new, warmed over kind of socialism, not at all, and are instead discussing how to restructure society so that the healthy, creative, individual initiative of the entrepreneur or business leader is preserved, and capital can be freely formed in a way that avoids an unhealthy congestion of this capital and an unjust, unbridled gap between rich and poor. Social threefolding is not waiting for a new and morally better human being to evolve. We have to just accept people as we are, including our psychological foibles and even our psychological disorders. What Steiner suggests instead is to evolve new institutions and social arrangements. For example, the division of labor, economic associations, and the new frameworks for labor and ownership. These structures will work against our antisocial tendencies, but we must keep in mind that social threefolding is not a rigid dogma or a utopia. It is a social organism. And just like any organism, it must continually adjust and adapt to new challenges and imbalances as they arise in real time. Okay, so that brings us up to speed with where we are so far.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mike. We have a question, a viewer question, if that's
Okay, let's hear it.
okay. All right. So, how would innovation be financed, especially the kind of innovation that is visionary? The Fords and Benzes of society who put all their energy into something that most others can't see as important, or may even see as dangerous or unhealthy.
Yeah, this is a great question. How is innovation going to be financed in a threefold society? So when we talk about innovation and financing innovation, we're speaking about gifting or lending on a personal basis, on the basis of the competence of an individual who promises to create something new, something that consumers and others may not even recognize as having any value yet. Clearly, this cannot be a matter of convincing a large number of people, even though this might be possible in cases of crowdfunding, but usually of bringing someone with surplus money and no immediate use for this surplus money together with someone who has some latent talent or innovative vision, someone who does have a use for the same money, but just doesn't have the money to manifest their vision. So it is really a matter of finding some way to match the visionary with the investor or donor such that the process is efficient and not wasteful of time and resources on the part of either the visionary or the investor or donor. Now, in a threefold society, this might be done through a new organ of the independent cultural life that I describe in my book, Money for a Threefold Society, called a community supportive. The idea is that representatives from all aspects of the local community, I call them multi-stakeholders, form a kind of independent hub within the free cultural life, free from economic and political influences, for the purposes of gifting and investing. So on a regular basis, the multi-stakeholders review submissions and decide on where to channel funds to independent recipients at arm's length to the multi-stakeholders, of course, according to both short-term and long-term needs. So that way, people who have money to invest or gift can simply pledge or make their funds available to this multi-stakeholder advisory committee, assuming they are trusted by these investors and donors, without spending a lot of time hearing all the pitches and vetting all the different possibilities themselves. And likewise, those in need of funding, ranging from individual people in need of very specific support to the more innovative and visionary people, can make their pitch to this group. So all the funds can be pledged to this autonomous hub and get channeled through again as grants, either purchase grants for immediate short-term needs or loan or gift grants for long-term capital development, for education, and for creative innovation. Of course, all of this would be completely voluntary, and there's nothing to prevent individuals from freely contributing or receiving funds directly through friends and family, through crowdsourcing, through an angel investor, or through other methods. So that's how I imagine it anyway.
Nice. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, so is there anything else we need to do before we get started with our reading?
I think we're ready to go.
Okay, good. Well, let's switch over to the screen share. All right, so last time we had read this little paragraph, one possibility to avoid. It was at the bottom of page 62. And I'll
Mhm,
just recap what we had read then.
mhm.
Basically, that Steiner's repeating or saying that the economic life will be bounded on the one side by the natural conditions and on the other by the laws and regulations of the democratic rights state. And if the natural conditions are highly restrictive, soil and so on can be made more productive through technical means, or other measures can be taken. And if the conditions imposed by the rights life are highly restrictive, then capital investments and other labor-saving means can be used to reduce the dependency on labor. But any highly disruptive technologies must be introduced in conjunction with the democratic rights life in order to ensure that these disruptions will have a healthy effect and will not lead to massive income loss or undue hardship for people. Okay, do you remember talking about that?
I do, definitely. Yes.
Is there anything that you wanted to add before we go on?
No, no, I'm good to go on.
Okay, so let's go on to the next paragraph. It's the one at the very bottom of 62, working into everything. And
Mhm.
so I'll just say briefly what it's about. So basically, at this point in the chapter, Steiner has finished talking about, in an in-depth way, about why it's so crucial to separate the economy and the right state. And now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about why it's so crucial to have a separate and free cultural or spiritual cultural life. So this cultural life is all that has to do with individual abilities. This encompasses the entire range of soul, spiritual, and physical abilities. This area is completely different from what lives in the exchange of goods and what lives in the life of the right state. The cultural life can only be healthy if it depends on nothing but the impulses of individuals and the free receptivity people have toward these impulses. If human abilities were to be artificially influenced by the economy or state, then these abilities would largely be deprived of their living qualities, and this would have a crippling effect. Human abilities have a certain power of their own, and this power must be allowed to develop freely. The receptivity of others to what develops must likewise be allowed to unfold in a free way. And so the free cultural life can only develop in a healthy way if it is brought forth independently, based on its own impulses, and if it is received by people who accept these impulses with full understanding. Okay, so if you could read that, please.
Sure. Working into everything that is brought forth within the organization of social life by the economic life and by rights consciousness, there is something that stems from a third source, from the individual abilities of each human being. This area includes everything that serves the social organism, from the highest spiritual achievements to those achievements that flow into human works through the greater or less great physical aptitude of a person. What comes from the source must flow to the healthy social organism in a completely different way than what lives in the exchange of goods and what can flow from the life of the state. There is no way to bring about this inflow in a healthy way other than to let it depend on the free receptivity of people and on the impulses that come from the individual abilities themselves. If human achievements resulting from such abilities were to be artificially influenced by the economic life or the state organization, then these achievements would be largely deprived of the true basis of their own life. This basis can only consist in the power which human achievements must develop out of themselves. If the acceptance of such achievements were directly conditioned by the economic life or organized by the state, then the free receptivity to these achievements would be crippled. But this free receptivity is the only way to allow achievements to flow into the social organism in a healthy way. The cultural life, with which the development of other individual abilities in human life is also connected by countless many threads, can only develop in a healthy way if it is brought forth based on its own impulses and if it is connected to people who accept its achievements with full understanding.
Okay, thank you, Linda. I'm just going to add a couple thoughts and then we'll discuss. Okay, so he's basically saying that the abilities of the spiritual cultural life or just the cultural life enter the shared social life of humanity from two directions. First, the ability to be creative, to produce, to perform. And second, the ability to understand, acknowledge, and appreciate the creativity of another. So this area is really a radical interrelationship of the abilities of people taken all together. And this works the other way as well. A creative person must also appreciate their audience or clientele. They can't just create something and then try to force it on people or force them to like it or appreciate it. It's an area of self-awareness. What am I actually good at? What can I offer that is needed and will be appreciated? And Steiner also refers to the cultural life as a source, which he does not do for the other areas. The cultural life is a kind of point of origin. so much about our societal life originates and springs from the life of individual human abilities. So he's laying the groundwork for a discussion about the cultural life now.
Got it. I mean, it sounds like a really beautiful flow. Sounds like, I mean, there does need to be a level of self-awareness as to, what am I good at? What do I like doing? What could contribute to society? And, will the audience, as you call them, appreciate it or need it, or and not to shove it down someone's throat just because I'm good at something that I'm gonna sort of bring that into the community and expect to be paid for something that is not helpful or appreciated or yeah. So it really is uh, an alive kind of like one would need to do work on oneself, I would imagine, to sort of come to that understanding and that ability, the ability to hone their skills and yeah, I see a flow. I see a flow.
Yeah, I think the imagination is something very free, and it's called the free cultural life. And we have to think about how every person has abilities of some kind or another. And if we think of all these abilities of all the people, and I don't, I mean creative abilities, I mean physical abilities, people also have disabilities. But there's this world of what people are able to do. And this area of social life is its own area. It's different than the economy. It's different from the right state. And so we imagine this place where people are, it's like a point of origin where things are entering society from these individual ability sources. And people are bringing forward their abilities, and then everyone else is kind of seeing, yeah, that's something I have a need for, or it's a kind of interrelationship, a multi-sided interrelationship of possibilities. And then it's a matter of distilling these possibilities down into realities.
Hmm.
And what we do individually, like, the example I like to use sometimes is guitar playing. Someone plays a guitar, and you can sit in your room and you can play guitar all day long. That's not really part of the social life of humanity. But as soon as you bring that forward into the social life and you say, I want to offer this as something for others, and then people can appreciate it or not appreciate it, then it enters into the society. And so we're
Hmm.
talking not about this private world, we're talking about the social side of it,
Hmm.
how these abilities enter into the society.
Hmm.
Okay?
And I think, like you said, that there are some things that people don't even know that they need
Yep.
that haven't been created yet. And so, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
like
interesting.
yeah, the viewer question about Benz and Ford, these were innovations that people hadn't even imagined at the time. And so people didn't know they needed it, but there were creative people that had these abilities to imagine the unimaginable.
Mhm.
And so it's a matter of finding a way to make these come into the society and fructify. And our whole 20th century life was changed by these innovations
Mhm.
and many, many more. And the 21st century is shaped by new innovations still. Like we're talking
Mhm.
about AI and so on, that's really shaping a new century. And all of these things have to be brought into society. They're
Mhm.
very important. And how this happens, how the freedom happens, how the receptivity of people is to what comes. This is all part of this cultural life, it's called.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm all ears. I'm very interested to understand how it would be different for us, and based on what we do now. I mean, some people are struggling artists or struggling to get their innovation or idea, to get funding for the ideas. And you're sort of at the top of the your description, basically talking about the level of, well, there's going to be people with money that gifting or grants or whatever that would there would have a place to go, and at this moment in time, I don't know how many, like if you've got an invention, you got to be able to market it and find the right person to buy into it, all of that stuff. So this seems like it's more of a efficient system where artists or inventors could have some place to go for investors. And it seems like a good thing.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, this is not a utopia that magically there's just going to be a bunch of money available for everybody to become an artist and no one works anymore. I think this is a fantasy that we have to be careful not to slide into. I think we have to be realistic. Like Steiner is saying, it's not only the push from the artist side, but there needs to be a draw, a receptivity for the artist's work as well. And that's also free. You can't compel this. You can't, an artist can't say, I've decided to be an artist and I'm just going to paint all day and everyone's going to like what I do. You have to allow for the freedom of the people to say, well, I do or do not like this. So it's not a one-sided thing, a kind of utopia. And also, if we think about our current society, we have what's called venture capital. And venture capital is large amounts of money that people, very wealthy people, we're talking in the hundreds of millions plus, who are looking for those places where they can invest in an opportunity where they can make even more money, right? So there's this high level investment that only applies to certain kinds of investments that promise to deliver many, many times of a return. And that's usually some very high tech field or some highly capitalized situation. And there isn't really a place in our society for right now for the smaller things. Like, where can somebody get a few $100s or a few $1,000s as a gift to do some kind of interesting project? It's really the wealthy investors don't want to spend time on these kind of nickels and dimes to them. And then the people that don't have the money, they to them that would be a make or break. To have a few $1,000s might be make a big difference. So that's why I'm suggesting in my book, let's fill in that little gap with this community supportive, which makes it possible for these smaller scale lending and gifting to happen without being really inefficient, without wasting everyone's time, right? So there may be a way to break through the gridlock of this empty middle area where there's just no possibility for people to get funding, right, for small projects. So I think there are ways.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, definitely sort of closing that gap allows for people to, rather than sort of living a life where, oh, this is not going to make me money. I don't have the money to do it, therefore I have to go and do something that is not meaningful to me. It creates an opening that maybe they're going to do that thing that isn't meaningful, but they're also going to have a hope and place to sort of grow their ideas and see if society can find use or pleasure in whatever it is that they're making.
Yeah. And I mean there are groups like this in existence. It's not like they don't exist. It's just I'm just saying it may be organized. If there was a free cultural life that was separate, the problem is that everything is fused together, and there isn't really a separation between this cultural life and the economic life, or there isn't a separation between the cultural life and the rights life or the government. So you either have to apply for a government grant or you need to go through some industry, and there isn't really a free space for this to occur, you see. I think this is what's lacking.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something you wanted to add?
No, no, no. I was just thinking about Elon Musk, and I mean, just because he's part of our discussion last time, how he had to work really, really hard and sell people on the idea of Tesla, and sort of working crazy hours to bring in investors and people who, just it's hard work right now. Like, I don't know, to have people invest, and it worked out for him. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, in the
Mm,
particular case of Elon Musk, he was able to inherit a little bit of money from his father's side, and then he used that to take some time off, and that's when he developed PayPal. And that was a very successful business that he could then sell and then use the proceeds to build another business. So he kind of did this by chaining one wealth thing to the next, but he
mhm,
needed that initial seed to get started. And if he hadn't had that ability to take the time off to do PayPal, if he had to work instead, which most people have, then it would never have started at all. And so this is the problem of just getting started.
mhm,
This is a problem for many people. They have talents. I always think
mhm,
of Albert Einstein. When he was younger, he worked at a patent office.
mhm,
And what if he never left that job?
mhm,
We would not have the whole field of relativistic physics that we have today
mhm.
if he was stuck in that job.
Right.
So it's important that we find ways to free people up and give them opportunities.
Absolutely. And it kind of brings to mind, I wonder how many ideas have not come to fruition because of someone not having some brilliant ideas that could help us, or help us enjoy life more, or, you know, be more efficient, or just, appreciate art and creativity, that didn't start because the seed money wasn't there. And so this kind of, like you said, kind of closes the gap there.
I think that number will be in the millions, many
Mm,
millions.
mm,
I think we can't even hardly imagine the loss to our society, global society, because the people that have the skills and knowledge and creativity are just not given those opportunities.
mhm.
And I think having a free cultural life is essential. I think we can't imagine how big of a change that will make when the creativity is freed and not bound to the government or the economy.
Mhm.
This is what we're talking about.
Got it.
Okay, should we move
Yes.
on to the next paragraph? The next
Let.
paragraph starts at the bottom of 63. It's quite long, what is being indicated here. And
Mhm,
so I'm going to ask us to just read up to here by fusing with the state life. So we'll just chop this into two parts.
mhm,
So we'll just do the first chunk and then the second chunk. So in the first chunk, he's going to be saying that we may find it difficult to understand how the free cultural life must be allowed to unfold in full freedom, because our views about this are clouded by the fusion of many aspects of culture with the state. This fusion has arisen over recent centuries, and we have come to accept it as normal. We consider there to be freedom in science and education, while we accept as a matter of course that the state administers this free science and this free education. We do not see how the state has made the cultural life dependent on its own needs. By contrast, we cannot fathom how closely the content of spiritual life is linked to the innermost human essence, and how the unfolding of this content of spiritual life can only be free if it occurs only through its own impulses.
mhm,
Okay? So if you could read
mhm.
that first chunk, please.
What is being indicated here is the healthy developmental conditions for cultural life is currently not understood, because the right view about this is clouded by the fusion of a large part of this life with the political life of the state. This fusion has arisen over the last few centuries, and we have become used to it. We certainly speak of freedom in science and teaching, but we take it as a matter of course that the political state administers this free science and this free teaching. We do not develop any sense for how the state thereby makes cultural life dependent on the state's own needs. We think the state creates the positions where teaching takes place. Then those who occupy these positions can develop the cultural life freely. Having grown accustomed to such an opinion, we do not notice how closely linked the content of spiritual life is with the innermost human being, within which this content unfolds. How this unfolding can then only be free if it is introduced into the social organism through no impulses other than those that come from the cultural life itself.
All right, so that's the first chunk. So he's basically just talking about this fusion with the state. And I think he's speaking of the educational institutions, the research institutions, the universities, that they're providing the funding, and we think these are free institutions. And we don't realize how unfree they are. What do you think about that?
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. It's not free at all. Because, I mean, just one small example, if a pharmaceutical company who wants to promote their kinds of drugs or whatever funds a university, then that university, if the researchers come up with something that's directly hitting the bottom line of that pharmaceutical company, then the researcher will be out of a job, I imagine. So that researcher would then choose not to research that which is fundamentally helpful. Maybe they can come up with something that is less expensive or occurs in nature so that people can use it. But then this drug company that's invested billions in this particular drug or whatever, they're going to stand opposed to that research, and they're not going to. I imagine it happens all the time. Um, so yeah, it's not free, and whichever political leadership is in office would absolutely influence the education or re-education of our children or youth. And in doing so, then they would also hire people of that kind of mentality and belief system. So it's not free at all. And I mean, these are just a few of the examples that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, the first example you mentioned is the fusion of the economic life with the cultural life. And this is a very big problem also. In this specific part of the paragraph, he's speaking, though, of the state, of the government.
Okay.
And it's more of the second thing. If for example, the state is funding a university or research, or if it's funding the education system, it will, as you say, control this, and it will have its own influence over this.
Hmm.
And even, we can think about specific small things, but he's looking at the big picture here, and he's saying that this is just a general fact that the as long as the government is funding the cultural life, the life of abilities, yeah, then it never gets an opportunity to develop freely.
Hmm.
Okay?
Yep.
So let's go on to the second part of this paragraph, then he'll say a little more about the same thing. It's the part that begins by fusing with the state life. And in this second half of the paragraph, he says essentially that over recent centuries, because of the fusion with the state, science came not only to be administered by the state, but even to gain much of its content through the state. Of course, this is not to say that the principles of mathematics or the laws of physics themselves were shaped by the state, but as a cultural expression, science most certainly has been shaped by the state. We see this especially clearly with history and many other studies, how these have been shaped, even in terms of content, through the needs of the state. And this shaping, in keeping with the interests of the ruling classes, has brought about the current scientifically oriented materialist ideology of the proletariat. From this, the view developed that all cultural life is just a reflection of economic realities. So this is his conclusion that it's really because of all this, we have come to this belief that cultural life is just a reflection of economic realities. So if you could read that, please.
Mhm. By fusing with the state life, not only did the administration of science and that part of cultural life that is connected to it acquire its character in recent centuries, but also the content itself. Of course, what is produced in mathematics or physics cannot be directly influenced by the state. But think about history, about other cultural studies. Have these not become a mirror image of what has arisen from the connection those responsible have to the life of the state, from the needs of the life of the state? It is precisely through this imprinted character that the current scientifically oriented, culturally dominant ideas have worked upon the proletariat as ideology. This proletariat noticed how a certain character is stamped upon human thoughts through the needs of the state life, in keeping with the interests of the leading classes. The proletarian thinker saw a mirror image of material interests and interests conflicts. This engendered the perception that all cultural life was ideology, was a reflection of the economic organization.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
Mhm,
So in this last part, he's talking about the socialist view that history or the conflict, the class conflict, is a result of the economic organization, and that cultural life is really not a real thing. It's kind of an outgrowth of the economic life. Because of the fact that the economic life is the basis, according to this view, the economic life is the basis. Out of this grows the state, and out of that comes the cultural life. But Steiner thinks of it the other way around. In fact, he sees the cultural life as being the source of the entire society. We don't have a society except for the human abilities, and that the human abilities are actually the starting point. And out of this grows the life of rights and the economic life. So Steiner flips it on its head, and he's critiquing this notion that the way the proletarian thinks of things is that everything is just material interests and conflicts of different interests, the class struggle, right? And so, in this view, the socialist view, cultural life is a kind of just an outgrowth of these other things. And education, for instance, is just an ideology that one group has control over or the other group. And so, of course, in the Communist Manifesto, they want the working class to be responsible for education instead of the ruling classes. But Steiner is
mhm,
saying, no, 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 this is all misguided. We have to think of the cultural life as a completely separate and independent entity.
mhm,
It should have its own free existence. So this is the whole concept why we have public education today, is that so the government runs education. And this is different than if the economic powers were to run education. Before, maybe in older times, only the wealthy could afford education, and education was private education essentially. And people, the ruling class, would bring their children up to be part of the next ruling class. And it was kind of a club thing that the public was not really invited to this education system. And this created a certain not very healthy education process. So those thinkers said, okay, we need to make education public and make it funded by the democracy, and that the people will control it. And that will make things so much better, they thought. And so their concept was, let's make education run by the state. And so we had public schools or state schools. And
Mm.
Steiner's saying something completely different. He's saying that neither of these is really a good idea. The education needs to be its own free entity, not run by economics or the state. It has to arise out of a separate area of social life, an independent, free cultural life. And we don't have such a thing today. We don't even know what that would be like. We have a hard time imagining this.
So would it be the same kind of principle where you have natural born teachers, people who are really great and love teaching, that would sort of say, "Hey, I want to be a teacher," like, um, and then the community would come together and say, "Yeah, you know what? We need some teachers. Who would set the curriculum? Like, I mean, how would that be set? Would it be just free for all? Hey, I believe in flat Earth. Come to me," like, or whatever the tendency or the sciences like physics and all of that would be set to the times how much we know, but you know, ideologies, all of that stuff that runs rampant in our schools. I think I would much rather have free thinkers. I would much rather have teachers that encourage people to think and to blossom their own creativity. That's the kind of teaching that I would hope that Steiner's talking about. I don't know. Maybe I'm.
Yeah, so you're right. Immediately, a lot of fears come to mind. What if this or what if that? And but it's a legitimate question. How would that work if it was truly free? Would it just descend into chaos and illiteracy, as Steiner says? Would people just teach every who knows what theory about anything? I don't agree that this is what he has in mind. I think he's not talking about eliminating curriculum. He's talking about creating a free cultural life. And I think within that free cultural life that's independent of the state and independent of the economy, it doesn't mean it's completely chaos. I think there could be within that free cultural life, there are also people that have skills and abilities around curriculum development, and they could look at from their independent perspective what might be a good curriculum, right? So there could be some guidelines around curriculum without being too restrictive. But I think the important thing is that the curriculum doesn't come from the economics or the state sources. This is the key.
Mhm. So, how would this work? Because education systems, if I've understood history of this, these school systems have been brought to make workers, basically for the economic life, right? For the industries, you know, to educate people to be able to be hired and work. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, a little. I mean, this is certainly true in the last, like in the early 20th century, but
Mhm.
educational history is long and has many complexities to it, but and different regions are different. For example, in Canada, public education was brought to bring about a common language. The French and English school system, there were many immigrants to Canada, and they were all speaking different languages, and so it was a way to bring the country together as a unifying force to have them learn a common language, English or French. And then when you consider, for example, Germany, the Prussian education system arose. It was a military concept. They wanted to develop soldiers and officers for the military. So that was their impulse for public education. And if you look at the UK system, you look at the US system, you look all over the world, you'll see many different impulses. And one of these was building an industrial type school where the young people would learn to be good workers. So that was another impulse. So
Mm.
it's a complicated thing, but there was a time before public education when it was really just up to the wealthy, and the rest were illiterate, more or less. I mean, there was sometimes initial grades you could do a few years and learn the basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, but it was just a few years, and then as a child, even you'd go to work. There were before child labor laws, for instance, and so it's complicated. But I think today we have to look at the situation that it evolved into a state-based system for the large part. And the question is where to go from here is what
Mm.
we're discussing. And Steiner is not saying we should just keep it the way it is. It's he's saying it's fundamentally flawed, that we need to liberate it again from it used to be connected to the religious life. Education was tied to the church, the Roman Catholic Church in Europe, and now we have to liberate it again from the state. So he's talking about the future of education here. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yes. Thank you.
So yeah, let's read the next paragraph because he's really connected to this. And again, it's a longer paragraph, so we're going to break it down. It starts at the bottom of 64, and we'll just go to where it says in this field too. So right here, we'll just do that first chunk. So we'll
Yep.
just go up
Okay.
to that part and we'll read the first part. Okay.
Okay.
So I'll just warm it up first. Those who believe that state and economy ought to give direction to the spiritual cultural life will change their minds once they recognize that there exists a spiritual or realm of the mind that lies beyond the external material life, a spiritual realm that bears its own content within itself. This recognition will lead to the insight that art, science, worldview, and everything connected with the cultural life requires social autonomy. Within spiritual life, everything is connected. One branch cannot be free if another is unfree. Cultural life must not flow from the requirements of the state. The state must not administer any branches of the cultural life. It is entirely different if a teacher follows the impulses of the state or if they draw their impulses from a self-sufficient spiritual life. Okay, if you could read that, please.
Yep. Such a view, which stultifies a person's spiritual life, ceases when the perception can arise. There prevails within the spiritual realm a reality that goes beyond the external material life, and which bears its content within itself. It is impossible for such a feeling to arise if the cultural life does not unfold and administer itself within the social organism freely, out of its own impulses. Only those representatives of the cultural life who stand within this kind of unfolding and administration have the power to give this cultural life the weight it deserves within the social organism. Art, science, worldview, and everything connected with these require this kind of autonomous position in human society. For in spiritual life, everything is connected. The freedom of one cannot flourish without the freedom of the other. Even though the content of mathematics and physics cannot be directly influenced by state requirements, what we develop from these, how people think about their value, what effect advancing these can have on the rest of cultural life, and much more is conditioned by these requirements if the state administers branches of the cultural life. It is one thing if a teacher in charge of a primary school follows the impulses of state life, and another if they draw their impulses from a self-sufficient cultural life.
Okay, so this may be a little confusing to the English reader because we don't use the word spiritual in this way. It's a translation of the German word geistig, and so the word geistig in German really means something more like mental, things that have to do with the mind. That's what is meant here by spiritual. It doesn't refer to anything oogly boogly. It's literally just a word, a pretty regular, normal word in German, but we don't have an equivalent. Mind is not quite the same idea because mind is more of something subjective. The spirit is not something subjective. It's something more objective. Like, for example, 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, this is not just my opinion. This is a kind of mental fact. And this realm of these mental facts is the spiritual world in the German language. Okay. So he's speaking about this notion that this cultural life, the spiritual life, this mentally objective world needs to be recognized as something that exists independently and externally to the material world. So
Mhm.
we have this wrong notion today that the mind is a derivative of the body, that our brain is what produces thoughts, that because of our body, we therefore have the mind. And he's saying, no, 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 the mind is actually the world of this objective spirit, the reality of thinking and what we experience in our mind. This exists independently of our body. Okay. And
Mhm.
once we recognize this, we will recognize that a similar independence needs to be achieved for the cultural life. And
Mhm.
so all of this is interconnected. Art, science, worldview, and religion, and so on. All of this is interconnected. It's part of this spiritual life, it's part of this objective mental world. And so you can't just have one branch of this being free and the rest being unfree. You can't have some of it free and the other tied to the state.
Mhm.
It's very important to Steiner that all of it is free.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yep. And this idea that it's separate, many people might say, well, if I don't have a brain, I can't think. So the materialist kind of thinker might have a little bit of trouble with this part, I'm imagining. um, but to have this objective truth, like you said, 2 + 2 = 4, not being an opinion, not being a feeling, but a verifiable objective truth. Um, in order to get to that truth, we need to think.
Yeah.
And that, what I'm hearing is it's independent of the body.
Maybe
Steiner's.
I'll try to phrase it again. This
Mm-hmm.
notion that without a brain we can't think. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I would correct it slightly and say without a brain we can't be aware of our own thinking activity. The brain
Mm-hmm.
is like a mirror that mirrors it back to us. We are thinking, but the brain allows us to become aware of what we are thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And to this question, something like 2 + 2 = 4, this is a fact that does not depend on brains, right? It's not that we have brains, therefore 2 + 2 = 4. The fact of 2 + 2 = 4 would exist even if we didn't have brains,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not the mathematical fact, the subjective mental fact that depends on the brain. It's the objective mental fact that depends on our thinking. Okay. So the thinking is the essential thing, not the brain. And the brain is there to reflect our thinking back to make it conscious to us.
Mm-hmm.
So the brain makes thinking conscious, but it is not the cause of thinking. This is a big confusion today.
Mm-hmm. It's a very important point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this objective mental world exists independently, even if there were no human beings. It doesn't really matter that we're not causing it. It exists independently of the material world. And because of this independence, it needs to have its own independent structure in the society as well.
Hmm.
And this is called the cultural life or the spiritual cultural life.
Yeah, I think this is a very difficult concept for some people who are new to Steiner to grasp. And I think that is there some kind of book that you might recommend people reading
Yeah.
or
Well, yeah, I mean, Steiner talks about this primarily in his book, The Philosophy of Freedom, which he wrote when he was younger. Um, this book he wrote in 1919, but The Philosophy of Freedom he wrote, I think it was 1894. So he was half his age at the
mm,
time. And it was one of his first books that really laid out this notion or debunked the notion that the brain is the cause of thinking.
mhm,
And this book, The Core Points of the Social Question, is a kind of extension of that philosophy of freedom if we were to apply freedom in the social world. I think we've talked about this in the earlier podcasts,
mhm, yeah,
but it's an important topic to bring to mind. And so what he's saying is, in a way, the even though the state cannot change 2 + 2 = 4 and certain laws of physics and certain things, it can definitely influence things like how we teach geography, how we teach political studies, how we teach language, how we teach, some of these subjects are very open to influence by the state or the economic powers that control things.
mhm,
And so, generally speaking, we can't have one part of the free spiritual life. That cannot be free unless all the parts are free.
mm,
And he's suggesting it's not just a matter of worrying about math and physics. We have to worry about all of it. It's all
abs-
important. It all has to be free of the state,
mhm,
including math and physics.
mhm.
Does that make sense?
Understood. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, makes good sense.
Okay. Now, in the second half, he talks about social democracy. And if you recall, I think we've spoken about this before. Social democracy is what has evolved largely in most Western countries in the 20th century. It's this fusion between the state and the economy, the political, the political state that has sort of allowed the free market capitalism to continue with an aspect of it being taxed, it being controlled, it being regulated by the state. And so social democracy is a way for the democracy to keep the good things about capitalism, the free enterprise and the free markets, but yet restrict it through taxation and regulation so that we can create a welfare state. This is the idea of social democracy.
Mhm,
And so he's going to criticize this in the second part. And essentially, what he will say is that the social democracy, which believes that social problems are best addressed through the collaborative agency of a strong democratic state, has merely inherited past habits of thinking. Social democracy seeks to incorporate the cultural life into the state body built upon the economic life. This can only lead to the devaluation of the cultural life, as has already happened in the case of religion. Social democracy insists that religion must be a private affair, independent of the state. And this, of course, is fundamentally correct. But as a matter of fact, all aspects of the cultural life must be private and independent affairs. However, social democracy promotes this view regarding the separation of religion out of a different motive, not in order to promote the autonomy of religion, but rather because it considers the promotion of religion to be a waste of state's resources. Religion is simply not needed by the state, and that is why social democracy excludes it from public life. But the fact remains that religion cannot flourish as long as other branches of the cultural life remain shackled to the state. All cultural life, including religion, must be liberated. Okay, so if you could read that second part, please.
Sure. In this field, too, social democracy has merely inherited the habits of thought and customs of the leading circles. Social democracy sees it as its ideal to incorporate cultural life into the social body built upon the economic life. If it were to reach this goal it had set for itself, it could only continue the pathway along which the cultural life has been devalued. Social democracy has one-sidedly developed a correct perception with its demand: religion must be a private matter. For in a healthy social organism, all cultural life must be a private matter, in relation to the state and economy in the sense indicated here. But in transferring religion to the private realm, social democracy does not proceed from the opinion that a cultural achievement will thereby gain a position within the social organism that will give it a more desirable, higher development than if it were under the influence of the state. Social democracy is of the opinion that the social organism may only use its resources to advance what it vitally needs, and religion as a cultural achievement is not one such need. In this way, excluded one-sidedly from public life, the branch of cultural life cannot flourish while the other cultural achievements are shackled. Modern religious life will develop its soul-bearing power for modern humanity in conjunction with all liberated cultural life.
Okay, thank you, Linda. So he's saying that basically it has evolved to the point during the course of the 20th century that religion, it was, in Marx's terms, it was seen as the opiate of the masses. We don't need religion anymore. It's not really part of what we need for our society. And so we will eject it. We will no longer fund it. We will no longer, but it used to be part of the government. In fact, it was really closely tied to the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Catholic Church, for instance, was really closely tied to the power structures of the government. And then with the Reformation and other things that happened, Marxism, it finally became kind of ejected. And now it's kind of this orphan that wanders around and looking for someone to support it. Religion, I'm not saying religion is an orphan, because there are billions of people interested in religion, but the state doesn't sponsor it in many Western countries, and not out of a sense that, oh, we want it to be independent, but out of a sense of we don't need it. And so, but people do need it, right? And they do look for it. But he's saying why, but it retains science, education, all these things are still shackled to the state. And the question is, how can we create this independent cultural life as a separate area of society that is funded, but it operates independently of the economic life and the government? That's the question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good question. Like, yeah. So I'm sort of seeing the huge benefit for independence, and I'm sort of curious about how this could come about. I wonder if that would shift anything.
Yeah.
That would be a curiosity of mine.
I,
And
I think it
how.
would definitely shift something. And
Mhm,
and I think it would liberate the human being in a way that we can't fathom today.
mm,
So this is a really important topic,
mm.
and we will pick it up again in our next podcast. We'll continue
Sounds good.
with the same topic, okay? So we'll
Sounds
see
good.
you. I think we'll finish there, and we'll see you next time.
All right. See you
Okay.
next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye for now. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like and subscribe.